Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Today we are going to have a press conference on Myanmar. So we have two guests. The first speaker will be Ms. Yanghee Lee, who is the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. And our second guest is Mr. Marzuki Darusman, who is chair of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Myanmar. I apologize for being a little late, and we're conscious that we have to finish within half an hour or so. So each of them will make some introductory comments, and then we'll open it to questions. Thank you. Please, Ms. Lee.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and sorry to keep you waiting. We had difficulties getting in here. I'm the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights situation of Myanmar. I'd like to make a few introductory remarks, and I will entertain questions from you. I'd like to first start expressing that I have great respect for the people of Myanmar. And I, along with others of the international community, had every hope that the situation in the country under Aung San Suu Kyi would be vastly different from the past, but it is really not that much different from the past. The government is increasingly demonstrating that it has no interest and capacity in establishing a fully functioning democracy where all its people equally enjoy all their rights and freedom. It is not upholding justice and rule of law. The rule of law is an ideal that the State Councillor repeatedly says is the standard to which all in Myanmar are held. However, I see that this is clearly not the case in reality. If the rule of law were upheld, all people in Myanmar, regardless of their position, would be answerable to fair laws that are impartially applied, the impunity would not reign, and the law would not be wielded as a weapon of oppression. There have been countless cases that demonstrate this fact, including under the NLD government, and there continue to be such cases against journalists, lawyers, and human rights defenders. Although the Constitution vests significant power in the military, the civilian government can do a lot. However, they are either tacitly or explicitly choosing not to use this power. And I urge the State Councillor to use all her moral and political power. On a regular basis, I receive reports of new charges lodged against lawyers and activists while exercising their legitimate rights and freedoms. And a point in case will be the two Reuters journalists, Walon and Chosei Wu, and a lawyer, Kin Chaw. She and three other journalists from 11 Media, Nayin Min, Jozo Lin, and Pyo Wei Win, and activist Tin Chaw. When very few people have access to northern Rakhine, a certain individual has been granted access twice, including to Indin and to Latoli, where we've heard of the famous massacres that had occurred in Rakhine. He has created videos that echo the military narrative, which shockingly have been circulated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to UN agencies in Myanmar. I welcome the recent decision of the pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court, and as you all know, that the Human Rights Council just established, through its resolution, an independent mechanism. The establishment of this independent mechanism will be an interim step, and the international community must continue to work so that this mechanism can be established in the very shortest time as possible. Allegations to senior government officials committing acts of genocide against its own people is most serious, and if established, would amount to a violation of preemptory norms of international law. Myanmar's lack of compliance with the Genocide Convention, although it is a state party to this convention, and a lack of adherence to obligations arising from international treaties and customary international law to investigate and prosecute allegations of crimes against humanity and war crimes must not be tolerated. Thank you, and I stop here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Darusman?
Thank you, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the press. I joined the Special Rapporteur in apologizing for this delay. Sorry.
It's on.
I think
That's fine.
it's an alert.
It's on. It's a telephone. Somebody's telephone is on. Is it an alert?
It's like a statewide or citywide alert.
That's true. There was a bomb. Yes.
Are we good now?
There's a bomb threat in the Time Warner building, and that noise was an alert to all people on their cell phones.
Ah, all right.
So that
Okay.
was just what the noise was. Sorry, please proceed.
All right,
Sorry
thank
for
you.
the interrupt.
Thank you. As I was saying, apologies for this delay, and may I just bring out a few points before we go into the Q&A. Yesterday, I presented a final report to the General Assembly, and it was by way of pointing out that a detailed report of 444 pages was issued earlier, and the final report was submitted to the Human Rights Council in Geneva in September. Just to quickly go over the ground, we concluded that recent events in Myanmar point to the gravest crimes under international law. Three areas were at the focus of the fact-finding mission's exercise activities: Kachin, Rakhine, and the Shan states. We did not have time and resources constrained prevented us from covering the other areas. And that presumably will be a task for the extended fact-finding mission. Now, more to the point, we concluded that in Rakhine states, the acts of the armed forces, the Tatmadaw, and other security forces fall within 4 of the 5 categories of genocidal acts. These are technicalities. We'll go into that as we go along. And we also concluded that the Rohingya may also be victims of crime of apartheid. We do not underestimate the complexity of the issues and the difficulty of the task. The Myanmar government's hardened positions are by far the greatest obstacle. Its continued denials, its attempts to shield itself under a cover of national sovereignty, and its dismissal of 444 pages of details about the facts and circumstances of recent human rights violations that point to the most serious crimes under international law. You may have followed the proceedings yesterday, where the representative from Myanmar, to the effect, did contest the report. This response only strengthens the case that the international community needs to act, and accountability cannot be expected from the national processes. I indicated that the fact-finding mission welcomes the fact that the Human Rights Council resolved to set up what they call an interim mechanism as a follow-up to the fact-finding mission's work. It's a stopgap measure, however, and it's the least that the international community can and must do immediately. Now, accountability, and I will deliver that message to the Security Council personally this afternoon. Accountability concerns not only the past, but it also concerns the future, and Myanmar is destined to repeat its cycles of violence and human rights violations unless there is an end to impunity. At the core of this crisis is a human rights catastrophe. We are aware that the Myanmar authorities say they want discussions with ethnic groups, with ethnic armed groups about federalism, the integration of ethnic armed groups and into the armed forces, and the sharing of natural resources. These are the three fundamental issues confronting confronting Myanmar. One is federalism. Second is the integration of the armed forces, of the ethnic groups, and the sharing of natural resources. No progress has been made on this, and therefore, unless progress is made, the situation will continue as it is, and it will eventually lead again to committing of atrocities in the country. I stress that atrocities continue to take place today, even until this very moment. The remaining Rohingya community continues to suffer the most severe restrictions, the most severe oppression, and nothing has fundamentally changed over the past one year, since August of 2017. It is an ongoing genocide that is taking place at the moment. Now, the Myanmar authorities finally have pleaded for more time, but under the current government, and indeed over 70 years since its independence, they have used that time to commit atrocities, cover them up, and evade all calls for accountability under the questionable claim that they are preserving the nation. They've asked evidence of human rights violations, as the envoy from Myanmar has done so yesterday. I will point that our full report provides that in abundance, and that facts are out now. And in determining how it will respond, Myanmar now stands at the crossroads. It can respond as a responsible member of the United Nations and take up the call for accountability, or it can continue on the same self-destructive road. The international community must do all it can help to take the right decision, and insofar as the fact-finding mission has been extended by the Human Rights Council, we have called to the Myanmar authorities to engage with the United Nations, to engage with the fact-finding mission, and as it stands today, it remains valid. I will not repeat, of course, what I've laid out in the UNGA yesterday on the third committee, and I'll stop here and we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Michelle Nichols with Reuters. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you so much for doing this briefing today. I wanted to ask about, obviously there is the UN Security Council briefing this afternoon. Many diplomats have told us we're expecting a procedural vote called by China to try and stop this briefing. In your report, you have called for the Council to impose an arms embargo, targeted sanctions, but as we're likely to see this afternoon, the Council's quite divided on this issue. So what's your sort of message to them on that front? Have either of you met with the Chinese delegation while you've been here in New York, and what's your message to them?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we'll still on track to attend the Security Council session this afternoon. There have been no changes at this stage, at this point, and we expect that the fact-finding mission will be able to then attend that session and lay out the report to the to the Security Council. Our call would be fundamentally for the Security Council to act on the report, and that is to ensure that accountability is undertaken. We've laid out the options, either to the ICC, the referral to the ICC, or the setting up of an international tribunal. now, of course, recommending path ahead on accountability is what fact-finding missions do, and therefore these are what is being laid out there with these two options. Now, we're not, of course, foreclosing any other options that the Security Council might deliberate on, but we would be taking this one step at a time and allow the council to deliberate on this, on the merits of the report, and let it take its course in a way that they feel would be reflective of the dynamics of the council. Now, we have not met with China. I'm wondering why you're singling out China here. It could be any other country, but of course, we know that China has expressed its concern about human rights being deliberated and discussed at the Security Council. But this would be unprecedented if the Security Council is able to resolve to act on this. Then henceforth, human rights will be an integral part of the Security Council deliberations, and that is, I think, an ultimate objective that needs to be attained. We have not met with the Chinese. We've always been reaching out to them. We've done so in the recent past, but not this time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those questions. I have engaged with the Chinese in the past. This time I have sent a letter for requesting a meeting and numerous emails and numerous requests for a meeting. They have not even acknowledged receiving those requests and not even a yes or a no. And I'd like to add on to what Mr. Darusman has said about the accountability mechanism. What we're hoping for is the referral to the ICC, and also maybe the next option, if the ICC fails, then an ad hoc international tribunal. But at the same time, what I'm also calling for is for member states of the Rome Statute to refer this to the ICC themselves, or also any country can exercise universal jurisdiction. And so I think now is the time where the onus is on the international community, and more so the onus is in the Security Council if they're actually to really adhere to the Charter of the United Nations. And this would be a test to the work of the Security Council. I've heard it being said that the past determines the present, and the present presents itself with choices that will determine the future. And I think we're at a point where Myanmar and the international community both are at this juncture at the right choice to make that will determine the future of not only Myanmar, but for the world's peace and security of the region and the world. Myanmar continuously says that there are no quick fixes. Because of this slow to address, we've seen years of persecution, years of crimes against humanity unfolding in Myanmar. And now the same narrative is there that there are no quick fixes. And I would say that you need to quickly respond, otherwise then there will be more things that will slip, and the people at the end of Myanmar, all people will suffer in the future. Thank you.
Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. You mentioned that there are steps that the civil authorities could take, in addition to just expressing the moral authority and their outrage at what's happening. But could you be a little bit more specific on the concrete political steps that the civil government can take given the fact that the military has so much power under the Constitution there.
You mean the civil government in Myanmar? You mean?
Yes, in Myanmar, yeah.
Maybe Ms. Lee could start.
The civil arm of the hybrid government there in
The
state council.
There are certain powers delegated, I believe, to the civil authorities. The military is predominant. Rapporteur mentioned that she suggested that they be specific steps that the civil side take on the issue of the Rohingyas, and I want to get more details on what those might be.
I thank you for that question. When the NLD-led government came into power, I had given the state councilor a list of benchmarks. And within that list, I have also presented to her 200-some laws that must be amended, repealed, or rescinded. Okay, and new laws need to be acted. Now, the old colonial oppressive laws, they need to be repealed, and if they're still in the books, then it's used against the civilian population. And for instance, like Wallon's case, the Official Secrets Act, it dates back 100 years in the colonial times. And as long as it's still in the books, they've used it to arrest and charge the two lawyers. Now, so once the civilian government has the power to do the legislative reform, and it's not being done. And the new enactment of laws, it's very slow when it's protection of the civilians. But new laws that can actually, or amendments to laws that can actually oppress civilians, are very quick to be passed. And that is what I meant, that there are steps that the civilian government has a lot of power to do. And I presented the list to the Legal Affairs Committee, Shuiman, 2 years ago. Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Lee. Sumana Ali, La Voce de New York. I wanted to know if you have any message for President Mint, since he has the power to pardon the journalists that are being imprisoned right now.
Yes, I would certainly think that he does have the power, the presidential power, and I think he should use this power for those two journalists, and not just for those two journalists, but others too. Okay, others who, for instance, Kin Chaw, a lawyer who's been defending the students. If you remember the 2015 student-led demonstrations against the education policy, and now she's in Tarawadi prison. Okay, when lawyers who defend sensitive cases, they're put in prison and they're charged with cases, with old laws, for instance, the penal code, or mostly now in when there's a Section 66D. Okay, and I just saw that the president had a message on the UN Day today. Actually, today is the UN Day, I believe, and I think as a gesture he could pardon. And as a gesture and he presented 2 or 3 pages of a statement for celebrating the UN Day. And I think as another first step, incremental step, would be to allow access to my mandate and to the fact-finding mission, and unhindered access to other UN humanitarian actors. Yes.
Could I just, before we go on, to add on this, I think what the Special Rapporteur has stated is of utmost importance. The fact-finding mission has found that one of the factors that had contributed to the committing of these atrocities was that democratic space has really narrowed down there in Myanmar, almost nil, and therefore pardoning these reporters would be one of the rare opportunities for the government to prove to the international community that it is trying to restore democratic space in Myanmar. And so we are all watching this, and we are expecting that the government of Myanmar do the right thing. Now, on a bit on the question by the gentleman just now on what the civilian government could do. You are referring, of course, to the State Council because she is emblematic of the civilian government. Two things. I think she should gradually refrain from this denying that these atrocities have happened. She has softened her stance in the recent period by saying that we could have probably done it differently or better, implying that she's cognizant now of these horrible events. Now, the State Council has not actually stated any objections to the contents of the report. She's only said that it might not be useful at the moment for Myanmar because it's undergoing a social change process and this might be disruptive. But nevertheless, I think the next step for her would be to say that acknowledging the accountability report, the report of the effect finding mission, let's do something about it.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lee, a question for you from your initial statement that you had seen really no changes at all. I assume this would mean that you would oppose the return to Myanmar under the current circumstances of all of the Rohingya who have fled to Bangladesh. And what do you make of the comments that the government has said about all of the progress and things that they have been doing since last year? Mr. Darusman, you talked about the state of the Rohingya who are left in Rakhine, and you used the words about an ongoing genocide. I wonder if you could explain or give some details about what you know about this ongoing genocide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In reference to your question about any progress made I think in Myanmar as a whole, now, I don't think there's been a lot of progress in terms of economic development and infrastructure, but in the area of democratic space and people's right to claim back their land that was confiscated or evicted, nothing has developed. There's no progress in that. Conducive conditions. Myanmar, the repatriation is not possible now. The conducive, unless the situation in Myanmar is conducive, I will not encourage any repatriation. Conducive conditions means that they should not go back to the existing laws, policies, and practices that are existing there, the oppressive laws, the discrimination. All they need is, the minimum is what they need is freedom of movement, access to basic health services. Right now, the situation in Myanmar is such that it's like an apartheid condition, where people who are living in, who are Rohingyas left in Myanmar are still facing problems. They have no freedom of movement. The camps, the shelters, the model villages that are being built, it's more of a cementing of a total segregation from, or separation from, the Rakhine ethnic community and the Rohingya community. And recently, you may be aware that Rura 2 was in Sittwe, had a firebrand. Rura 2 had a big event there. And he had said that once the UN refers the Myanmar to ICC, he will pick up a gun. And he was the one that threatened to, to throw for members of his country's patriots to stand up and rise and teach this beastly woman a lesson to me. And at that same time, a real activist, Chin Chaw, was standing there with a sign, referral to ICC. Now, this man was now put back in jail under Penal Code 505, and was facing another 6 months jail sentence. So in these conditions, people cannot go back. Thank you.
To this day, there is a continuing outflow of the parts of the Rohingya community going out from Myanmar to Bangladesh. It goes up to perhaps into the thousands, actually. The remaining community there, the estimation is estimated to be around between 250 to 400,000. They are concentrated in the northern part of the state, and therefore this very link of a continuous flow connects the Rohingya community there with what happens to the people now residing in Cox's Bazar. Now, genocide involves at least, in the case of Myanmar, 4 of the 5 requirements of genocide were fulfilled. Killing, causing serious bodily harm, inflicting conditions designed to destroy the group, and imposing measures to prevent births. Except perhaps for the killing, the other requirements continue to hold. The community there continue to suffer from the most severe restrictions that amounts to destroying the group by inflicting conditions that would lead up to that objective. And therefore, in that sense, it is a continuing state of affairs that we've concluded having taken place there in Myanmar as of August 2017 in recent times. But it goes back to even further back to the early 2010s, where the gradual restrictions were then imposed on the community, which eventually led to the community having to defend itself, and that explains why. Perhaps it was the last straw on the camel's back, that they had to react the way the other ethnic armed groups in Myanmar had to react by taking recourse to measures that was intended to defend the interest of the community. So, of course, the other matter here with regard to genocide is that although these requirements were met, but the underlying factor, of course, is the genocidal intent, and we've been able to establish that genocidal intent is there, and that therefore it is warranted to bring the 6 generals that we've identified for prosecution in the ICC or in a judicial tribunal to be set up. This, of course, starts with the Commander-in-Chief, General Min Aung Hlaing. Thank you.
Did you wish to add something?
Good morning. Thank you. Sorry to keep you waiting. San Suu Kyi, a lot of attention has been paid for her over decades. Do you think she's in total denial on the state of the Rohingya, or that, and just says a few things so that she looks like she's part of the international community? Because I remember her first speech a few months ago about this, where she did not recognize their plight. Is she in total denial, or is she trying to balance herself out with the military?
Okay. Well, thank you. I think she is in total denial. She chooses not to recognize it. When I met her, I told her, I requested that she needs to go to visit Rakhine and see, and I even said I'm willing to show you pictures that I have. And her response was, no, I don't need to. My ministers know what they're doing. They do their job well. She did say in Hanoi that there could be something that could have been done differently in Rakhine. But then recently when she was in Japan, when one of the interviewer asked her this, and she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I never said that. So, that's an indication of absolute denial, I think. Because had she not said that, I don't know what you're referring to. I never said that. Where did you get that information? But it's all over the place what she had said in Hanoi. And we thought that maybe there was a little glimmer of hope. The one thing one of the reasons why they can't go back, or the people who are in Myanmar are still facing the genocidal conditions, is, remember a few years ago when the 4 religious packages laws were enacted, the marriage law, the Buddhist, and the conversion law. One of the laws is with the birth spacing, is they had for Rakhine that you cannot have children. The birth spacing has to be 36 months. And more than 2 kids will not, families with more than 2 kids, the children are blacklisted. And birth registration for Rohingya families is not a possibility. So they're not recognized as a child. They're not recognized as potential member of the society because of the birth spacing of 36 months. Now, I'd like to, before we close, I'd like to bring to your attention something that completely flew out of the radar of the international community. We heard about the killings in 2016, October, when about 75,000, 80,000 people had fled to Cox's Bazar after the ARSA attacked 3 police guard posts. But in 2012, there was an incident, October. This was after the riots and the killings in June. October in Chokpyu, this is now an economic place. Chokpyu, there was there was about 18 Rohingya homes that were burnt. There are no Rohingyas left. There are no Rohingyas living in Chokpyu because they were all killed then, driven by the community. They were driven out to the sea. The remaining who chose to stay at home were killed by the machetes, locked in their houses, and totally burnt. And from reflections from those who took part in this incident, they reflect that the people were killed in the thousands, maybe to about 10,000. I believe about 10,000 because 18 homes disappeared from the face of Chokpyu. So you see that these things have been going on even when it was out of the radar. And if it hadn't been for the fact-finding mission and then this big scale, I think the military thought that they could get away from the small scales of things, and so they could get away with a big scale. But I think it got over what they expected. The people fleeing from Rakhine was much more than they had expected, I think. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I'm sorry we don't have time because of the noon briefing for anybody, but maybe you would like to... Special rapporteurs, and the chairman will be there.
Thank you very much.